Introduce a friend of 30-some years, Bill Zeffiro, who's in New York City, and I, of course, am in Wilton, Connecticut. And I believe we first met when you were working on the Road to Ruin. Am I correct there?
Or were we working on I think we were working on Take It Easy. Did you issue Take It Easy?
Yes.
Yeah, because I music directed that.
The only CD that's available goes for like $600. And of course
That
I have,
CD goes for
well, no
$600?
one's going to buy it. So I did,
Oh.
I have quite a few of them. So I put it
Oh.
up. So if any of you have been waiting for a big sale, this is it. It's $16.95 or $15.95. Yeah. Anyway,
They should grab it. That's got Stephanie Kurtzuba, who was a star in The Irishman by Scorsese. Christian Anderson's been working ever since, and Avenue Q and The Big Monty and on and on and on. We've Full Monty. Anyway, there were a lot of people in that show that was their first thing, that have done Broadway and film and done other things since then.
Where was the show eventually produced?
We were at the Judith Anderson Theater on Theater Row and ran about 4 months. Pretty good for a little off-Broadway show.
So basically it's a World War II retrospective.
Yes. The thing that made the show unique was it was about the home front. It was about the fellas over here.
Before that, let's go back to your childhood.
Okie dokie.
And, where does the piano enter your childhood?
Well, the first instrument that entered my life was the trombone.
Oh.
My dad loved the trombone, and he was always going on and on about the trombone section in Harry James's recording of You Made Me Love You. That ba-da-ba-ba. And so because my dad loved the trombone, I wanted to learn to play the trombone. And I had trombone lessons for 2 years before the piano came into the house. The piano was bought for my sister. And my poor sister, it was love at first sight for me when the piano came into the house. And I went over and I could already read bass clef. So that afternoon, I taught myself to read treble clef. And when the piano had been in the house for basically a week or less, I could already play her whole book, which wasn't a good way to inspire her. Nobody ever made me practice. The only thing my folks ever said was, will you please stop pounding that damn piano? And I still haven't.
Did you play in musicals in high school?
I played, my high school, much to my regret, never did a musical. I was in plays in high school, but I played piano. There was a Dixieland band. There was a stage band. There was I remember that they did Charlie Brown Christmas one year, and I played piano for that, and there was no music published yet. I learned to play it by ear from the recording. And, but I played constantly. I took my first piano lesson when I was 10, which, as you know, is a little late for piano, but that's when I started. And nobody's ever been able to get me to stop.
So when did you first make any kind of money out of the piano?
I think the first time I got paid to play, I was at Oberlin, and I was a voice major at Oberlin. I wasn't a piano major, but I played. And they had the Rathskeller, which was the student, it was a decent restaurant in the student union, and they would hire a pianist to play for 3 or 4 hours. It was a big whopping $25 and a steak dinner. And I think that was the first time I actually got paid to play. And then same time, remember, I was a voice major too. I played Matt in the Fantastics at the Oberlin Inn. It was a long time ago, folks. I played Matt in the Fantastics, and they paid us $10 a show plus dinner. And I felt like I was just riding on air. I walked out of there with my $10, and I could order dinner at the Oberlin Inn. And I thought, this is a good business. But that was the beginning.
And after you graduated, what happened?
I auditioned for a dinner theater um, group in Florida called the Musicana Dinner Theaters. And what this brilliant man, Jack Lachey, did was he had founded these dinner theaters in Florida. There were four of them. And he brought students down, and you would get your room, you would get your board, you would wait tables, you'd live on your tips, and at the end of 3 months, they'd hand you $1,000 scholarship. Now, that's still not bad when you're 21 or 22. But in 1979, that was my first gig. Was at Musicana Dinner Theaters, and I was a singing waiter. And then while I was at Musicana, they noticed that they couldn't pry me away from the piano. And the other thing was because it was an educational thing, they were usually hiring very proficient classical pianists that didn't necessarily know how to play show tunes. And I was playing the show tunes and all that stuff, frankly, with more of a feel for it than a lot of their classical pianists. Not all of them, they had some great ones. But then they started getting me away from the waiting tables, which was good for everybody because I was a lousy waiter. And they started having me do some of the music directing and play in some of the shows.
So how many months are you doing this for?
I was there from December 1978 till August of 1979, and then I went back. I was at Indiana University for a while. I did 2 semesters there, and after my 2 semesters, I went back to Musicana, this time as a pianist, and I saved enough money to move to New York. And in October of 1981, I moved to New York with $1,000 and said, let's see what happens.
And where did you find a place to live?
I had 2 good friends, a lady named Zena Larson, who I went to Oberlin with, and she and my pal Brent, who had been my roommate in Florida, they had found an apartment at on 42nd and 8th. And so I moved to New York. They already had an apartment. It was 2 bedrooms, one for Zena, and Brett and I had to live together. And the apartment was $900 a month, or anyway, it was like $303 each or something. And I was wondering, how in the hell am I ever going to come up with $300 a month? But of course, now anybody do a little song and dance if all they ever had to do was come up with $300 a month. But that was my first New York apartment. And Bruce, I got my first job when I had been here 4 days. I got a job. I played in a joint, a place called, I think it was called A. Hardy. It was over on 2nd Avenue. And I bought a backstage that week. There was an ad for a Union Carbide Industrial. And they needed a singer-pianist in his 20s. It was a long time ago. They needed a singer-pianist in his 20s to be in this industrial show for Union Carbide. And I went over to Daryl Sherman's apartment. And I auditioned for Daryl and her companion, Richard Sudhalter. And I sang They Can't Take That Away From Me at the piano. When I finished, Richard said, I bet when you do that in the piano bar, everybody goes crazy. And I said, well, yeah, they kind of do. And then he looked at my resume and he said, Oberlin, huh? I said, yeah. He said, me too. And 3 days later, they called me to tell me that I was doing the Union Carbide Industrial in Florida. This was 1981. I'd been in New York a week, and I was flying back to Florida for 3 or 4 days to do this industrial, and I was getting $750, which was a fortune. It paid my rent for a couple of months, and that was because, and I will be forever, ever grateful that Daryl Sherman was my first New York friend.
Will you explain to our audience what the industrial show means? You're not singing all of the original lyrics. They're being adapted to Union Carbide. Is that correct?
Exactly, like we did. We make ethylene oxide and glycol, that's our pride, Union Carbide. Does that remind you of Bye Bye Blackbird? But Daryl wrote a song for them. I'm trying to remember. That's not a good key. We're staying number one. We'll get the big job done with R&D to tell us what's new now. So that was the big Union Carbide song that we sang. But Industrials, I'm sure you know that that fantastic documentary about them. Companies would pay to have original musicals written, so that when they did their big meeting, their big annual meeting for their personnel, they would get a show with original music, or at least original lyrics, saluting the company and their work, and it was to build morale. And this was a way that a lot of performers paid their bills between Broadway shows or from piano gigs or wherever. It was and I guess I did 2 or 3 of those for Union Carbide.
How many people would have been in the audience?
You know, it's been a long time, but my memory is that it was at least a couple of hundred. This was like, we did one, the funniest one, the first one was for the ethylene oxide glycol division, which was the chemical that they used in rocket fuels and all those things. And then the next one was for the division that made synthetic sausage skins. I'm not kidding. It was for the synthetic sausage skins division. And it was me, Daryl, Richard Sudhalter, and I don't know if you remember a pianist named Joe DeReese. He's long gone,
Yes,
but Joe was,
yes.
and it was both of us. We were all singer pianists. It was Daryl, Joe, and me, and Richard was putting the whole thing together, and that was, but I'll never, when we did Seems Like Old Times, and this is the only lyric I remember, when those skins were made from animal intestines, seems like old, and I swear to God, that was the lyric.
But did the people not laugh, even though you're singing about their sort of livelihood?
Oh yeah, they still laughed. It was all in it was all in good fun. It was all in good fun, and the people were great. And they really liked us. I remember there was a lyric to NYC saluting different people in the department at ethylene oxide glycol. But that was my first job, and then within 2 weeks I had that. I played a few voice lessons for people, and then I got a job at a place called, not the famous Arthur's, but there was an Arthur's on 56th between 5th and 6th, where they didn't call them cabaret acts, they called them showcases. And I started playing showcases for people. And I'm sure you know the name Herbert Green.
Sure.
Herb was a great Broadway conductor, music man, anyone can whistle, the most happy fella. Herb was running ads in the backstage. And I went and met him. I'd already knew who he was. And I started taking lessons with Herb. And Herb had started a class. And he wanted me to play the class. So I was playing the class for the other folks I was playing the class. And then people started coming to me to coach. So I mean, really within like 2 months or less, I was coaching people from Herb's class. I was coaching people from playing at Arthur's. I had a gig. These Union Carbide things were popping up once in a while. And I was very, very lucky. I hit the ground running. And and like I said, Daryl was my first New York friend, and Herb really believed in me and always encouraged me, and was my teacher and my mentor. And this is from moving to New York in October of 1981. This was all happening even before Christmas. This was all starting to happen. It was pretty amazing.
And at what point do you embark on writing a musical of your own?
Well, that's a funny story, Bruce, because I'm such, as you know, a big, big lover of the American songbook, and we should talk about her a little bit later. But Kay Swift was my dear, dear friend for 6 years, and when you're that close to the greats, it made me feel like I didn't have anything to add. And so I didn't even really start writing songs. No, I wrote a couple in the 80s. There were a couple I played for Kay, and I remember she was always supportive and liked them. She would even, I remember she even showed me how to change a bass line on one and remove the harmony better. But I didn't decide to write a musical till 1997. Um, I had found this little pamphlet on The Road to Ruin. It was the pamphlet they handed out when you went to see the silent movie. The Road to Ruin was a silent movie from a genre called exploitation films. And what they were was they were movies that dealt with some sort of scurrilous subject matter, and they were done on low budgets, and they were shot on location. And I read this little pamphlet that you're supposed to get when you got The Road to Ruin, and when you saw The Road to Ruin, and it was supposed to be condemning all this horrible, immoral behavior. And I was laughing myself silly. And I turned to my wife and I said, "This is the funniest thing I've ever read in my life. And this is a musical." And I thought, I'd written two plays by then. I thought, well, you know what? I could write the book. And then I thought, well, what if I don't like the lyrics? You know what? I'll write the lyrics. And then I thought, what if I don't like the music? I know, I'll write the music. And with that amount of ego and complete throwing caution to the wind, I just decided to write the whole thing myself. And so
And
that was how I wrote Road to Ruin.
when did you meet Pat Birch?
Pat came to see Road to Ruin when we were at NYMF in 2008. And Ann Morrison.
We lost you, Bill. Bill, we lost you. Can you do something to get your voice back? I suddenly see a big Bill Zeffiro. We match the bigness of your picture to the bigness of your sound.
Can you hear me?
I suddenly heard you.
Hmm.
I suddenly heard you. You hear me?
Okay.
You hear
I can
me?
hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay. So let's pick it
Oh,
up where,
you asking me about Pat Birch?
right. So go into your meeting with Pat Birch. And did she
Yeah.
say this musical is better than Sweeney Todd?
Oh, she didn't say that, but she put me in the same sentence with Sondheim one day, and that was plenty for me. We were working on something. She said, "Let's do what Steve does," and I was like, I was just in the same sentence as Steve and Sondheim. And then after a lot of work, she said to me one day, she said, "You're a good writer," and I thought, I guess she wouldn't have done all that work if she didn't think I was, but I will never be able to tell you what that meant to me to have Pat tell me I was a good writer. That was...
But at this point, she's teaching at Marymount, and she used the Marymount students and some of that to work on the piece.
We did do that. That was really, and that was after Nymph and because see, Nymph, she just said the show's a mess, but I think there's a show there. And for about 4 months, we sat down and went over the script page by page, line by line. And she will, amazingly, she didn't write one word, she didn't write one note, but everything she did helped. And I said, "Pat, I think I should give you co-book writer credit." She said, "No." She said, "When the show's a hit, just director's royalty." And she wouldn't take a dime for a tremendous amount of work on the script. It was very classy. And
At that point, after that, is it that you start to record some of the score at PPI?
actually, Bruce, we recorded the score before Pat was on the scene.
Well, no, you had done a good chunk. The big attraction for me was you had already done. Chip said he's already recorded almost the whole score. We could knock out the rest of the songs in 2 minutes, and that proved not to be so true. But I'm
It
not
wasn't
sorry.
quite 2 minutes. But I'll tell you, we wouldn't have, Bruce, we'd have never gotten it done if you wouldn't have gotten on board. And I was happy to do what I could do financially to make it happen. And I'm very, very proud of that recording. It's
Tell the audience some of the people that you brought into the project.
Ann Morrison. Let me think. Sebastian Arcellus, who's done very, very well. George Irving, who just, it was magic hearing George sing my stuff. Stephanie Kurtsuba, who I mentioned before, who's having a very, very nice film career now. Brooke Sonny Moriber.
I brought Brooke in. That was I said I want to add Brooke to, and you said fine.
Is Brooke? She's got 8 or 9 Broadway shows, doesn't she?
Not 8 or 9 Broadway, but she has 8 or 9 shows, and never a big hit, but she always is a very important part of the various projects.
Well, she was great, and she learned that whole 13-minute finale, I think, in a day. But she was great. Stephanie and Sebastian, Michael D'Antuono, who did Zorba with Anthony Quinn and was one of the Julian Marshes in 42nd Street on Broadway. We had quite a crew. There wasn't a dud in the bunch, but I'll never forget George got so excited when I played him well, there's no other way to tell it. When I played him the Abortion Doctor's song, he just loved it and said he just couldn't wait to do it. It was a real compliment having him do that.
And what things do you write after that gets other productions but never a successful run?
Yeah. I've done a tremendous amount of work on a project called Houdini Among the Spirits with Chris Sarasso, who's a wonderful writer and actor, and we've done Houdini. We've had Bob Cuccioli. We've had Nick Wyman. We've had Michael Bryan, who's one of my favorite voices of all time. We've had Craig Schulman, Emily Bergel. I mean, the amazing thing when you write is that you realize that all of these fantastic artists, they want new material. They want a chance to work their muscles. And if they're available, they're really wonderful about coming in and doing what they can for a project. And I've been fortunate enough to experience that a couple of times now.
Where was Houdini showcased?
We did it at Manhattan Theater Club. We did it, now I can't remember the name of the place. We did it over on 52nd Street. Did we do it at Ensemble Studio Theater? If we didn't do it there, we did it. We did it at Alvin Ailey. They've got some great studios over at Alvin Ailey. We did it out in Montclair, not Montclair, at Drew University. And we had some really talented kids from there that worked on it with us. But we had Stephanie did it for us. Emily did it for us. Like I said, Michael Bryan, Nicholas Wyman. Nick was doing it while he was doing network. He came in and just learned it lickety-split and did the readings for us. It's I don't know what the right word is. It's really humbling, and it's an honor to have these folks just want to come in and do the best that they can for you.
Let's give us a little peek into your association with Kay Swift.
Yes. Kay changed my life. When I first moved to the city, I met a fellow at my church, at Marble Collegiate Church. And he said he was in a show called Levant by Levant, and that they needed an Oscar to play Oscar as a young man, to play him in his 30s. And I went over and I met the producer writer, and I did the method actor thing. I came in kind of a rumpled suit, and I had a cigarette hanging out of my mouth. And this is for a reading. I didn't know you weren't supposed to go to that trouble for a reading. And I read for her and played for her, and she said, all right, you're Oscar. She said, the first thing we have to do is go and have lunch with Kay Swift, because they were very good friends. Bruce, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I hadn't even been in New York 5 months, and from the time I was in high school, I had been trying to find Kay. When I read the discography that she did for the Gershwin years with Ed Jablonski, I was like, this is somebody I should know. This is somebody that I should be friends with. And so Lila Levant, a cousin of Oscar's who'd written this show, arranged it. And we went over to Kay's. And, all I really can tell you is that it was like Kay and I, even though we were 60 years apart, we were supposed to be friends. And we hit it right off. And one of the reasons we hit it off was Kay had just gotten a recording from, I think, the University of Miami, with Don Rose conducting his orchestrated version of Let 'Em Eat Cake. And that's the Gershwin show that's the sequel to Of Thee I Sing. And I owned the score for Let 'Em Eat Cake because I'd gotten it with permission to get permission to get it printed from the Library of Congress. I got Ira's permission back in the 70s. So Kay and I were one of the very few people on earth that could sit in her living room and listen to a recording of Let 'Em Eat Cake and sing along. Now, meanwhile, poor Lila doesn't know what the hell is going on or what we're doing. But from that moment on, Kay was my friend. It took us a little while to just sort of maybe reconnect, but then she was my best friend for 7 years. And I helped produce a concert of her music at Merkin Recital Hall in 1986. And we had Kay, obviously. We had Julie Wilson, we had Steve Ross, we had William Balcom and Joan Morris. We had a small orchestra. We had Louise Carlisle, rest in peace, who was one of Kay's best friends and her favorite singer. Kay and I did a lot together through those years. And the most amazing thing was that there was a window there where she was as sharp as a tack. She could remember everything, and she would, if I went to the piano and played a Gershwin song, she would say, well, George did it this way. And it was amazing. It was amazing. And she,
how many years after she had heard him?
Kay, okay, so this is 50 years later. Maybe, okay, 45, 50 years later, because we became friends in 1981, so George died in 1937. I guess I met her in 82. So George had already been gone 45 years. And she could still go to the piano and just play something from memory. One of my favorite things that she ever played for me, and I'm so sorry they didn't have iPhones then. We were talking about Harpo Marx one day. And she said that that there was a song Harpo wrote that wasn't very good, but that he always made her play it with him. And she went over to the piano and she played it. She said, see, it's not very good, but Harpo wrote it. And she played it for me. And
Well, tell us about her Broadway musical. She had one main musical, Fine and Dandy.
in 1930, partly to try to save her marriage, because she fell in love with her. She and her husband, James Warburg, decided to write a musical. And they wrote the show Fine and Dandy, which was fundamentally a star vehicle for a very popular comic at the time, Joe Cook. And they wrote a very, very good score. I think Donald Ogden Stewart did the book. It was the days when a show only ran a season because there was no air conditioning. Eleanor Powell was in it. And all I remember Kay saying about Eleanor Powell was, and she had a mother. Apparently, she was following her everywhere. Because I think Eleanor Powell was still a teenager at the time. This would have been 1930. But Kay wrote, she was the first woman to write a complete score for a Broadway show. And
Very, very few. There are a fair number of women lyricists, but women composers, that one hand would be more than sufficient to list those.
Yeah. I think the three women composers in Kay's era that remain known are Kay, Dana Swees, and Anne Rennell. And because of Kay, I actually got to be on a program with Dana Swees too. And this is so frustrating. I did have a nice conversation with Anne Rennell one day on the phone. And my, this tells you how long ago this way, I was in a ballet class. And my ballet teacher, Lord, you've never seen a more ridiculous sight in your life. But I got to talk to Anne on the phone, and I was actually supposed to go and meet with her at some point, but that didn't happen. But I did at least get to, obviously Kay being most important, but I did at least get to talk and be around the three big female composers from the 30s.
And to mention some other things you and I were involved in, I had the idea, similar to what other small record labels had, to record show tunes that hadn't been recorded, certainly not in the CD era. And you were my first musical director, and you had a lot of sheet music, and I had a lot of sheet music, and we may be working on a subsequent edition of all the logistics of working from New York, that you could come to Connecticut and see what Connecticut is like, and tell us about the current piece you're working on.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about the current piece today. I have written a one-act opera called Truman and Nancy, which is about the case that involves In Cold Blood. which was the murder of the Clutter family, in the early morning hours of November the 15th, 1959. Which means that today, 61 years ago, was the last day that the Clutters had their lives and had their normal life. And my piece is based on a graphic novel by a wonderful, wonderful writer named Andy Parks. Andy works for DC, or did for years. He wrote a film that was on Netflix a few months ago called Extraction, starring Chris Hemsworth. And Andy, in 2005, wrote a brilliant graphic novel called Capote in Kansas. And in Capote in Kansas, Truman Capote goes to Holcomb, goes into the home where the family lived, and he meets the ghost of 16-year-old Nancy Clutter. And Nancy tells Truman that her family, must be remembered for more than the last hour of their lives. And that if he can promise her that, then her spirit can be free and she doesn't have to continue to haunt the house. And he tells her that he will. And I read that. I'd never thought of writing an opera before. I read that and I said, that's a one-act opera. It's 45 minutes long and it's called Truman and Nancy. And after a lot of years of hemming and hawing, I reached out to Andy. I wrote Nancy's first aria based on one line in his novel, This House is Full of Love. And Andy got back to me that day. That day, he got back to me and he said, yes, we should do this, and I'm in. And we worked out the financial stuff, which was just to make sure that he received all the proper credit and everything that he should. And in fact, Andy invited me to come out to Kansas, where he lives. And last year, July of 2019, I made the trip with Andy from Olathe, where the Killers traveled from. We made the same trip the Killers made across the state, and we went and spent 4 days in Holcomb and Garden City. Met people who knew them, went obviously to their graves. There's a beautiful memorial park to them, saw the house, didn't go into the house, but saw the house. And there was a terrific exhibit at the Finney County Historical Society where you can see a dress that Nancy sewed herself and some other really touching things from the Clutter family. And after I finished that weekend with Andy, I said, it's time for me to write my opera. And with the exception of one scene, which I'm hoping to actually finish in the next day or two, it's written.
And this is something that many similar soloists might attempt to sing. It is not just for her necessarily, but
it's for a soprano and a tenor. And the Siegel Music Colony, Darren Woods, dear friend of mine, Janice Hall, got me in touch with Darren. And I reached out to, she helped me reach out to Darren when I had about 10 minutes. And he liked it, and he said, keep going. And I sent him an outline. And we are moving ahead. You know, at this point, it's got to be workshops and just sort of getting the thing on track. But they are being very supportive, and they're working with me on moving this project ahead.
The other thing that you and I share that has nothing to do with any of this is the New York Yankees.
Love the Yankees.
At what age did the Yankees come into Bill's life?
Well, you know, it's funny. I grew up a Pirates fan because I was from Pittsburgh. But I was certainly, I saw Clemente play when I was a kid, but I certainly was aware of Mantle and Maris and that. And I remember even reading a biography of Babe Ruth when I was in like the 8th grade. And then when I got to New York and I got to kind of settle in, I really didn't become the rabid fan that I am now till right around the end of the Mattingly era and right before they absolutely took off. And you couldn't pick a better time to become a Yankee fan than 1995-96. But been a huge fan ever since. And but I did grow up a baseball fan. My grandfather loved the Pirates.
How frequently did you attend baseball?
Well, as a kid, it was more watching it on TV and listening to it on the radio. But now, I go 30 times a year. I'm pretty hardcore. I get a 20-game plan, and then I go to a bunch of extra games. My favorite is there's usually like one weekend of summer where I just go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I just live out there.
Did you ever attempt to attend every Major League Baseball stadium?
No, but that sounds like a good bucket list thing to do. I was at spring training this year. I must have seen one of the last games before everything closed down. I was there on March 12th.
That's the
And
last day.
11th or 12th. Anyway, we didn't just go to Yankee games because my brother-in-law is a big Braves fan, and we also just wanted to travel around. And we saw the Mets play the Orioles, and I saw DeGrom pitch. Yes, on a Wednesday afternoon, the last Wednesday of the preseason before they shut everything down. And after I saw DeGrom pitch, I said, you know what, Yankee fan or not, when he's pitching, I got to go.
I was actually speaking to a baseball card dealer the other day, and who I didn't know at all. And we talked about various things. Are you aware there's a Mike Trout Topps card that sold for $3.4 million?
No. A new card?
It's one of a kind, but I'm thinking that can't be anyone's number one thing in life. He talked about Sandy Koufax, and of course, in those days, if you paid a player a lot of money, they had to be on the roster. You could not put them in the minor leagues. But they had Clemente, and they attempted, did you know the Dodgers had Clemente for a while in the beginning?
I didn't know he was a Dodger before he was a Pirate.
They attempted to hide him in Montreal, and somebody said, oh, no. You better take him on your roster, otherwise he's going to be a Dodger.
He was something, yeah. I remember of course I did too. My grandfather loved him. My grandfather was the one that really loved baseball in our family more than my dad or anybody else. It really came from we called him Pap-Pap. He was the big baseball fan.
And do you have a few pieces of memorabilia you might tip?
Let me see what I can show you here. Let me see. This is not a great way to do this. Can you see that helmet?
Yes.
That is signed by all of the 1998 Yankees.
Okay.
And let me see here. I got to be careful. I don't usually carry this around. That's Walter Johnson.
All right.
That's not a baseball player, but there's Theodore Roosevelt. I'm going to take this down and make sure you can get a good look at this. Don't give out my address.
You live in Pittsburgh. They have to look for you in Pittsburgh.
This is, I would say, my prized possession. I don't know if you can tell. You can see that's old.
Right.
That is a ball signed by Babe Ruth.
And how did you acquire this?
I'm a pretty serious autograph collector, and I had a good friend who's also a dealer that I did a lot of stuff with back in the 90s. I'm putting the Babe right back where he came from. And I had a check signed by Babe Ruth. I remember the trade. I had a Babe Ruth check and a Jacqueline Kennedy letter. And he said, I'll trade you the check and the Jacqueline Kennedy letter. And the thing that ball says to Vivian Hardy, Washington, D.C., from Babe Ruth. It has grass stains on it. So we're like 90% sure it's game used. And it's an old reach ball, which is the red and blue stitching. And coolest of all to me, the Babe is in quotes. Now, you probably know this. Babe Ruth stopped putting his first name in quotes after about 1927. So that puts that ball right smack in the era of Murderers Row and when Babe Ruth was at his peak. So it may be a little faded, but that's, I mean, if it weren't a little faded, I'd have never been able to afford it.
Do you have Gehrig and the other guys of that era?
I have a Hannes Wagner check, which if we do this again, I'll dig it up. I have a Hannes Wagner check. I have Napoleon Lajoie. I have Cy Young. Who else do I have? I've got Grover Cleveland Alexander. I have a bunch of those guys. I'll tell you what I can put my hands on. I have a ball signed by the 1937 Detroit Tigers, including Hank Greenberg.
Okay.
You want to see that?
Sure.
Bruce, as long as I'm over here, I'm going to show you something else, too. Okay. This ball is signed by the 1937 Detroit Tigers. It's got Charles Gehringer. It's got Hank Greenberg. It's got Mickey Cohen. No, Mickey Cochran. Mickey Cohen was a crook. Mickey Cochran, who was why Mickey Mantle was named Mickey Mantle. So that's signed by that whole team. And then this, I promise you, you're never going to see this again. That's 15 strands of George Washington's hair. I'm sure you know the name Charles Hamilton.
Yes, yes.
In the early 90s, he got a hold of a lock of George Washington's hair, and being a very good entrepreneur, he took that big lock of George Washington's hair, he broke it down into 15 strands, put them in those little glassine things with a portrait of George Washington, a copy of the original authentication, and then his signature, and that's why I have George Washington's hair, and I'll bet I'm the only person you know who does.
Yes.
Now, I thought you might like to see this. There's Cole Porter's signature.
Uh-huh.
And this is Irving Berlin at the Nixon White House singing God Bless America. We've got Irving Berlin, President Nixon, Joey Heatherton, Bob Hope, Pat, and it's to a television writer. And it says, to Paul Keyes, with my thanks for helping me through that wonderful evening at the White House on May 24th, 1973, Irving Berlin.
I think Paul Keyes might have been involved with The Tonight Show.
Yes. Yeah, he was a big TV writer. I think he wrote Laugh-In, too. And this is one of my favorite things that I have, because they don't even, a lot of times with these people, it's very, very difficult to get them together. That's Rodgers and Hammerstein together. There's a date on the postcard. It's from like May of 1960, so it's from very shortly before Hammerstein. Yes. Oh, okay. June 6th, 1960 at the Astor Hotel. And that's Rodgers and Hammerstein. I have to show you one more thing. There was one biography of Gershwin written in his lifetime by Isaac Goldberg. This book came out in 1931, and it was the only biography of Gershwin that came out in his lifetime. Gershwin, George Gershwin, A Study in American Music. This is Kay Swift's copy. And she left it to me. For Kay, Best, George, October 1st, 1931. And needless to say, that's one of my that's beyond a prized possession, because that's from Kay, that's from George to Kay to me.
Right. Well, again, I appreciate you giving us your time, and we can maybe continue it down the line when your Truman musical has been performed, and presumably there'll be a recording at some point of it.
Yes. As a matter of fact, Siegel Music Colony wants to get wants to do something, at least like a demo or something soon. Maybe, do you know anybody that has a record label?
Bruce Saraband, I know them.
I'm thinking, but anyway, yeah, I think we're moving ahead, Bruce, and obviously it'd be an honor to be on Original Cast.
Okay, well, thank you for being involved with me in all the projects, and when we record, hopefully Lost Broadway 9 with Chloe, we'll have many more unrecorded things, and you've told me you have a verse for someone to watch over me. That's not usual.
Yes.
So it's not a lost song, certainly, but
no.
If he does it, it is terrific.
I'll tell you what else we should have Chloe do. Do you know the song Hi Ho?
Yes.
I have a copy of Hi Ho where Ira changed a few lyrics so that a woman can sing it.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And the changes are in Ira's handwriting.
Uh-huh.
Bruce, this was a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you for doing this, and
thank you.
We'll be in touch on the phone.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.